Europe's forgotten people, the Nuragic civilization of Sardinia. Sardinia's megalithic and Bronze Age tombs. Sardinia is one of Italy's most ignored regions. Some of that is social and economic, and many of us will be familiar with old Sardinian houses being offered for sale in the early 21st century for €1 in order to end the depopulation of the island and rejuvenate it. One reason for its decline is that Sardinia does not have much by way of a thriving tourist industry. It has strong competition, after all, from elsewhere in Italy. Rome has the Colosseum and countless Roman ruins. Venice is one of the world's most iconic cities. Florence was the home of the Italian Renaissance. Few people today can identify any major attractions on Sardinia, and yet it does have them. A visitor to the island today, if cycling around it, will soon come across striking megalithic tombs dotting the landscape, while others are essentially large Bronze Age complexes of tombs, towers, and courtyards. One of these, Su Nuraxi at Barumini, has been designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. They are all evidence of one of Europe's most forgotten civilizations, which was ruled over by the Nuragic people of Sardinia for nearly 2,000 years. Who were the Nuragic people? The Nuragic civilization evolved from the culture of the Neolithic people who settled on the island of Sardinia as far back as the 4th millennium BCE. They were engaging in extensive agriculture, livestock herding, and mining here. Trade developed, and the people of the island acquired a degree of prosperity owing to the fact that Sardinia was one of the first places in the Mediterranean world that we know of where silver mining was occurring. With prosperity came a richer, stratified society, and this in turn created a society in which elites wished to be buried in substantial tombs that marked out their distinct position within their society. Hence, by the 3rd millennium BCE, we start to find all manner of megalithic tombs being built around Sardinia. Megalithic simply means giant stone, and so the tombs involved could be as simple as a dolmen grave where a single or a handful of giant stones were maneuvered into position to mark a gravesite. Over time, the people here began to quarry out burial chambers from the sides of cliffs and other hills and mountains, Sardinia being a very mountainous country. These man-made cave tombs are quite impressive in some cases. Moreover, the skills which were developed over 1,000 years of tomb building eventually allowed the people of Neolithic Sardinia to begin creating stone towers as the centerpieces of their villages. These are known as Nuragi, and it is from them that the term Nuragic civilization derives. Most studies agree that the Nurag began to proliferate from around 1800 BCE onwards, but it is difficult to identify a clear date of origin for the Nuragic civilization, as the culture evolved over hundreds of years in the 3rd millennium BCE before reaching a more refined state in the early 2nd millennium BCE. It is also from the mythology of the Nuragic people that the name of the island, Sardinia, comes from. In their stories and lore, a hero had come to Sardinia and inhabited the island with followers from Libya, a name which was used to describe all of the Maghreb in ancient times. This subsequently became entangled with various Phoenician and Greek myths to produce the hero Sardis, or Cid Adir, with Sardinia eventually emerging from Sardis. Exactly what the original Nuragic myth involved remains unclear. Historical outline. Before examining the megalithic and Bronze Age tombs and towers that the people of Nuragic Sardinia created, let's briefly just overview the historical outline. As noted, the Nuragic civilization evolved through the 3rd millennium BCE and reached a more refined state in the first centuries of the 2nd millennium BCE. At this juncture, we can speak of the culture here having moved through the Neolithic or Late Stone Age, through the Chalcolithic and into the Bronze Age. Though the Nuragic civilization would persist on large parts of the island for a millennium and a half thereafter, it broadly remained within the Bronze Age, despite large parts of the Mediterranean world having moved on to the Iron Age by then. Simply put, Sardinia was isolated enough to not have been too affected by wider Mediterranean developments, particularly so in the interior of the island. There was no centralized state amongst the Nuragic people. Instead, the Nuragic people remained divided into clans or tribes who ruled over small territories centered on villages. Some larger settlements resembling towns evolved over time, but for the most part, there were no cities to speak of amongst these people, though port cities of a kind did develop under foreign influence in the coastal regions. Their villages were centered on the Nuragic towers, around which primitive yet functional houses were built. Water management was an important part of their culture, given the arid nature of the geography and climate in many parts of the island. They clearly had aqueducts of a kind, which delivered water to more remote regions away from the main rivers. The main tribes included groups like the Ilienses, Balar and Corsi, with the Ilienses being the most powerful, dominating the southern and central parts of the island. Warfare would have been a feature of Nuragic life, as attested to by the proliferation of military-style statues, but at the same time, this does not appear to have been an intensely violent or militarized society. The Sea People. A theory has emerged in recent decades that Sardinia was the origin place of the mysterious Sea People, a confederacy of maritime invaders who descended on the eastern Mediterranean in waves between the 14th and 12th centuries BCE. The Sea People contributed hugely to the late Bronze Age collapse that destroyed cultures like the Hittite Empire and sent others like New Kingdom Egypt into centuries of political, social, and economic decline. The basis for this theory is a reference in ancient inscriptions and texts to one of the ethnic groups that made up the Sea People being the Sherdan, or Sherdanu. This has been linguistically associated with Sardinia. Many ancient historians are in favor of this identification, but a number of caveats must be added to it. Firstly, the Nuragic people, if they formed part of the Sea People, must have only been a small portion thereof. It is simply not feasible that these people by themselves could have launched fleets and armies to the eastern Mediterranean, which would have been capable of defeating and overthrowing more advanced powers like the Egyptians and the Hittites. Secondly, the ancient references, if they are indeed referring to Sardinia, only state that the Sea People had come from Sardinia. They didn't explicitly state that they were from there. Therefore, they might have been a confederacy of people from Western or Central Europe who had descended into the Western Mediterranean, passing through Sardinia along the way and gathering some followers amongst the Nuragic people. This is the most likely scenario, though the sources on the Sea People remain fragmentary and the entire idea of a Sardinian connection of any kind could be entirely spurious. Outside influences. There were many different influences on the Nuragic civilization over time, an inevitable development when we consider that this was a civilization that existed for around 2,000 years. The earliest were the cultures of Central Europe that spread to northern and central Italy in the Neolithic era. These included the Beaker culture, which influenced the Nuragic in terms of their agriculture, statuary, and tomb building. Later, the island was visited and partially settled by the Phoenicians. These were a Levantine people who in the early Iron Age, beginning in the 11th and 10th centuries BCE, began sending out colonies from their homeland in Lebanon to many different parts of the Mediterranean. Eventually, they established hundreds of colonies as far west as Hispania. Amongst these were a number of colonies or emporia on the coastline of Sardinia, the island occupying a key strategic position on the naval routes from Sicily north to the French Riviera and westwards to Catalonia. These Phoenician settlements on Sardinia included Tharos and Corrales, the latter of which is the forerunner of the city of Cagliari. Later, the island entered the trading networks of the Greeks. So many Greek colonies were established in Sicily and southern Italy that it became known as Magna Graecia, Greater Greece, while Massalia was also a Greek colony on the French Riviera, modern-day Marseille. Sardinia lay right on the passageway between Sicily and Massalia. There is little evidence to suggest that the Phoenicians and Greeks were in any way interested in penetrating into the interior of Sardinia. They simply traded on the coast, but a fair degree of cultural osmosis would have occurred between them and the Nuragic people nonetheless. Statues. Another significant part of Nuragic culture is their art, specifically the statues they produced. Early on, these were quite crude, but over time they developed into an aesthetic form of miniature statuary, while they also sculpted much larger stone statues. The giants of Monte Prama are an example of the latter. These are statues ranging in height from 2 to 2.5 meters tall, with stylized geometric features. The smaller warrior and religious statues, which the Nuragic people cast from bronze and other metals, are arguably more impressive. Often these had oversized or elongated limbs and features, which could be assessed as being poor quality workmanship, but it was intentional. The finer details of weapons that they were carrying are well carved or cast, indicating they were capable of more intricate metal work. These bronzetti, as they have been termed, were typically as small as 10 centimeters high, up to half a meter in height. They were cast using a now-lost method of casting in bronze using wax molds, something which indicates a high level of technical knowledge amongst Nuragic metalworkers. They had many uses, from religious symbolism to use as votive offerings in the many complex tombs which the Nuragic people built around the island. Nuraxi. Clearly, one of the most central and unifying elements of Nuragic civilization was the Nureg tower complexes, such as that of Nuraxi at Barumini. The central tower here is a beehive-shaped structure that originally stood between 18 and 20 meters tall. It was constructed in or around 1600 BCE. The complex had further towers extending off of the main central tower. Inside, there were several levels to the main tower, with spiral staircases leading up to different floors. The bastions with the outer towers seem to have been built later, sometime between 1300 BCE and 1200 BCE, indicating that this was a site that was in use for many centuries. Archaeological studies have indicated that a larger village than the average size for Nuragic people was developed around the towers. Exactly what the purpose of the site was remains something of a mystery. It is assumed that it performed a role as some sort of ceremonial or religious site, though the exact specifics of what this might have been are uncertain. It is also more than plausible that it had multiple purposes and could have been used as a defensive structure when necessary. The Giants' Graves. While there are thousands of tombs and stone complexes and towers around Sardinia, some of the most distinct are the so-called Giants' Graves, or Tombe dei Giganti. These are long, elongated burial chambers built with large stones underneath and then covered with earth and smaller stones to form a very large tumulus or mound. Though in many cases today, the stone frame has been exposed to the elements as the earthen shell has collapsed or been removed over time. Inside, there was a rectangular-shaped burial chamber, one usually built from very large stone slabs known as megaliths, while a corbelled roof enclosed the passageways. At the end of the chamber, there is usually a semicircular forecourt built with a series of large standing stones in a crescent shape. Both the forecourt itself and the standing stones could be said to depict either a crescent moon shape or a set of bull horns. It is unsurprising then to learn that the Nuragic religious system centered on the worship of a deity, which was a fusion of a bull and the sun. The forecourts of the giants' graves were accordingly understood to have been the scene of religious rituals associated with the dead who were to be laid to rest there. A large vertical stone slab was often placed over the main entryway to the burial chamber, one typically decorated with symbolic engravings and designs such as circles, spirals, and other patterns which are assumed to have had a religious significance. The reference to these tombs as giants' graves comes from their sheer size and the size of the stone slabs used to build them. Some are up to 30 meters in length, and the stones would have weighed several tons in many instances. Additionally, the stone slabs covering the entryways are such that local law held that only giants could lift them in and out of position to enter the tombs. Consequently, the idea developed that giants were buried here, though in reality it seems more likely that many of the giants' graves were not constructed as the resting place of a sole individual, but were instead communal burial sites with a strong religious and ritual significance. Some of the foremost examples include Kodu Vecchiu, near the town of Arzacena in the north of the island, and Sadomue Soruk, near the city of Cagliari in the south. Conquest. The Nuragic civilization would eventually fall prey to the emergence of an increasing array of more advanced societies in the Western Mediterranean. The Greek and Phoenician expansion into places like Sicily, southern Italy, southern France, and Tunisia had not just influenced the inhabitants of Sardinia. New powers had emerged here of a strength not previously seen in the region. As they developed and grew, they posed a growing threat to the Nuragic civilization, while the conquest of Sardinia also became a more attractive prospect for outsiders as trade routes developed between the southern shores of France and the eastern shores of Hispania, with lands further to the east in Sicily and beyond to Greece. This seems to have also occurred during a period of social and political unrest within Sardinia itself, leaving the inhabitants ill-prepared to deal with a substantial threat from without. The first such power to begin imposing its control over Sardinia was Carthage, a Phoenician colony which had been established around the mid-9th century BCE in North Africa on the site of what is now the city of Tunis in Tunisia. Beginning in the 6th century BCE, Carthage began an aggressive program of expansion around the Western Mediterranean, eventually acquiring control over large parts of North Africa, Sicily, Corsica, and the south and east of Hispania. In the 5th century BCE, they established control over parts of the coast of Sardinia as well. However, theirs was a loose form of imperialism in which the Nuragic people would only have experienced interference in the coastal regions. For many in the interior, life would have gone on much as it had done for centuries. Instead, it was the advent of Roman rule after the Romans defeated the Carthaginians in the First and Second Punic Wars in the 3rd century BCE that really changed matters. Over time, Sardinia became much more closely controlled by the Romans, who eventually formed it into a distinct province in conjunction with Corsica. Moreover, such was the pervasive nature of Roman culture that over time the society of Sardinia was transformed, bringing an end to the Nuragic civilization. Legacy. The legacy of the Nuragic civilization has been considerable. It is visible in the architectural heritage of the island. As noted at the beginning, a visitor to Sardinia today will not have to travel very far around the island before they start spotting the remains of the large stone tombs and nuraghi built by the people here thousands of years ago. There are over 7,000 nuraghi still standing in Sardinia today in various states of completeness. They are amongst the oldest and best preserved examples of megalithic architecture anywhere in Europe. The giants' graves are another legacy of Nuragic rule, and the tales which emerged around them have influenced Sardinian lore and storytelling over the millennia. Finally, Sard has survived here as a lingual legacy of the Nuragic civilization. It is a Romance language, one ultimately derived from Latin, which the Romans introduced to the island. However, it differs considerably from the many other dialects of Italian which evolved from Latin in the medieval era. These include dialects like Tuscan, Ligurian, and Sicilian. Firstly, Sard is the version of Italian which is closest to the Latin of the Romans, for the very simple reason that Sardinia was isolated from the Italian mainland, and the language remained in its purest form here after the Germanic conquest of Italy in the 5th century CE. However, Sard is also influenced by Paleo-Sardinian or Nuragic, the language which the Nuragic people spoke here in pre-Roman times. There are many loanwords from Nuragic within Sard, and so one will come into contact with the lost legacy of the Nuragic people every day in Sardinia, when these words are employed as part of their language. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel to show your support and watch more content like this. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. That's it for now. We'll see you in the next one.